I never thought my life would turn into a mess like this. People say that time heals all wounds, but that's only if the wounds don't cut too deep. I was just a regular guy, living what I thought was a decent life, until the facade of normalcy shattered when I discovered my wife's affair. Jessica and I met during our college years. She was ambitious, smart, and had that no-nonsense attitude that made her both attractive and intimidating. But the cracks in our marriage began to form as her career took off, and she spent more time at the office than at home. I should have seen the signs, should have picked up on the late-night meetings, the sudden business trips, but I trusted her. For 10 years, I had been her rock, always supporting her while building my own career as a survival instructor. But life's ironic. The skills I'd honed over years of teaching people how to survive in the wilderness would come into play in ways I never imagined. The day I found out about her betrayal was the day my world flipped upside down. It was a Friday evening. Jessica was supposedly out at a business retreat with her colleagues, discussing some major case they were handling. She hadn't even kissed me goodbye, claiming she was late and had to rush. The weird thing? She packed casual clothes. I brushed it off as a corporate thing, though in the back of my mind, something didn't sit right. But I was too trusting, or maybe too oblivious. After she left, I went about my usual routine. Dinner, a cold beer, a movie. I scrolled through social media absent-mindedly, my mind flicking back to the weird tension we'd been having lately. It wasn't until I accidentally knocked over her work bag that I noticed it. Her phone. She never left her phone behind. At first, I thought nothing of it. I was about to text her that she forgot her phone, but something stopped me. Curiosity. I wish I hadn't given in. My hands shook as I opened her messages. The first name that popped up was Dylan Reed, her law partner. Dylan, can't wait to see you tonight. The cabin is ready. Jessica, same. Hope Ryan stays clueless. I'll make up some story about work again. My heart dropped. The message thread stretched back 4 months, filled with flirtatious texts, dirty photos, and explicit details of their encounters. I couldn't believe what I was reading. I sat there, the weight of it crushing me like a boulder pressing on my chest. The woman I loved, the woman I thought I knew, had been lying to my face for God knows how long. It was like a switch flipped in me. Rage. Pure, unadulterated fury. But instead of confronting her immediately, I did something I never thought I'd do. I plotted. Cold, calculated revenge. I wasn't going to let her get away with it, not without paying the price. I remembered the texts, the mention of a cabin. My mind raced. She must have planned to meet him there, away from prying eyes. Perfect. I wasn't going to just expose her cheating. No, I was going to destroy both of them. I took a deep breath, the adrenaline coursing through me like fire. The next step was critical. I needed to follow them, gather evidence, and take them down in a way they'd never forget. I would wait until they were deep in the woods. I had a plan, one that would leave them regretting every choice that led them to this moment. As a survival instructor, I knew every trick in the book when it came to the wilderness. Every trail, every hidden corner of the forest near our town, I knew it better than the back of my hand. Jessica had no idea what I was capable of. Dylan? He was about to find out. I drove out to the cabin that night, but not too close. I parked a good mile away, blending into the surroundings. My heart pounded in my chest as I made my way through the trees, navigating through the shadows like a ghost. Every step, every sound was deliberate. I was prepared. I had brought along my hunting knife, a length of rope, and a small camera to capture every second of their betrayal. They wouldn't just be humiliated, they would pay for it, physically and mentally. When I finally reached the cabin, I could see the light flickering inside through the trees. It was eerie, almost like something out of a horror movie, but the real horror hadn't even begun. I crouched low, hiding behind a fallen log, watching as the two of them sat inside by the fire, drinking wine, laughing like they didn't have a care in the world. That was about to change. I waited, biding my time, watching as they got cozy, Dylan pulling her close, running his hands over her like she was his. The audacity. My blood boiled, but I forced myself to stay calm. The time wasn't right yet. Not until they were completely off guard. After about an hour, they finally stood up, heading towards the bedroom. Perfect. I crept closer to the cabin, slipping inside as quietly as a shadow. I could hear them giggling in the other room, unaware of the storm about to hit. My hands tightened around the rope. I imagined wrapping it around Dylan's throat, squeezing the life out of him. But no, that would be too easy. I wasn't here for a quick, emotional outburst. I was here for something deeper, something they would never forget. I wanted them to feel the same betrayal, the same fear I had felt. I positioned myself near the bedroom door, waiting for the right moment. As the sounds of their passion filled the cabin, my rage only grew, and then I heard it, Jessica's voice, whispering Dylan's name like I didn't exist. That was my cue. With a swift motion, I kicked open the door. The look on their faces? Priceless. Jessica screamed, scrambling to cover herself, while Dylan jumped up, panic written all over his face. "What the hell, Ryan?" Jessica shrieked, her voice shaking with fear. I didn't say a word. I just stared at them, my expression cold, heartless. This wasn't about talking. It was about action. Before Dylan could react, I lunged at him, grabbing him by the throat and slamming him against the wall. His eyes bulged as he gasped for air, but I wasn't going to kill him yet. I just needed to scare him, to make him feel powerless. "Ryan, stop," Jessica cried, but her words fell on deaf ears. I was beyond reasoning. I let go of Dylan, and he collapsed onto the floor, gasping for air. Jessica rushed to his side, trying to console him, but I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. "Both of you, get dressed," I ordered, my voice icy. "We're going for a little walk in the woods." The fear in their eyes was palpable as they hastily put on their clothes, too terrified to defy me. I grabbed my knife and the camera, making sure to record every moment. I wanted evidence of their guilt, evidence I could use to ruin their lives. We walked deep into the woods, the moon casting eerie shadows on the trees. Jessica kept glancing back at me, her face pale with fear. Dylan was silent, his eyes darting around like a trapped animal. "Ryan, what are you going to do?" Jessica's voice was barely a whisper. I didn't answer. I just kept walking, leading them further into the darkness. When we were far enough from the cabin, I stopped. The silence was deafening, the only sound the rustling of leaves in the wind. "Now," I began, my voice calm and measured, "you're going to dig." Dylan stared at me, wide-eyed. "What? Are you serious?" I tossed a shovel at his feet. "Start digging." The shovel clanged loudly as it hit the dirt. Dylan hesitated for a second, his hands trembling, before bending down to pick it up. His face was flushed red, a mix of fear, confusion, and disbelief swirling in his eyes. Jessica stood frozen next to him, her hands clenched together, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She kept glancing at me as if she didn't know who I was anymore. Maybe she didn't. "You're out of your mind, Ryan," Dylan muttered, his voice shaking as he drove the shovel into the earth. The soil was soft, damp from the recent rains, and the digging was easy. Too easy. "You're really going to make me dig our own graves?" I didn't answer right away. I just watched him with that cold, calculating calm that I had learned to maintain during life or death wilderness survival scenarios. The difference this time was that I wasn't helping people survive. I was deciding whether or not they would. Jessica's breath hitched as she watched Dylan struggle with the shovel. Her hands fidgeted at her sides, her eyes wide, looking for some kind of escape. There wasn't any. We were deep in the woods, far from the cabin, far from the nearest road. Even if they tried to run, I'd catch them. I knew these woods like the back of my hand. I could feel the tension rising in the air. My mind was buzzing with adrenaline, but I wasn't going to let it show. That would give them hope, make them think I was losing control. No, I had to stay in control. "Ryan, this is insane," Jessica finally spoke, her voice hoarse from panic. "This isn't you. Please, we can." I cut her off with a sharp glance. "Dig, or I'll make it worse." My voice was flat, emotionless. Cold. I saw the shudder that ran through her body as she looked at me like I was a stranger. I had to admit, I didn't recognize myself either. But that was the point. When you've been betrayed in the worst way possible, something inside you snaps, and you become someone else. Someone who doesn't care anymore. Dylan kept digging, his face scrunched up in frustration and fear. Jessica stood off to the side, helpless, watching him break down into sweat and grunts. For a moment, I wondered if she ever truly cared about me. Was it all just a lie? Years of marriage, love, and commitment gone in the blink of an eye because of this smug, entitled prick. The hole was getting deeper now, maybe 4 feet down. Dylan's face was dripping with sweat. Every time he shoved the shovel into the ground, the sound echoed through the forest, like a drumbeat building up to something terrible. That's when it happened. Jessica shifted nervously beside the hole, biting her lip. Her eyes darted between Dylan and me, as if she was debating something in her head. I saw it in her body language. She was going to say something she thought would change everything. "Ryan, wait." She took a small step forward, her voice trembling. "Before this goes any further, there's something you need to know." Dylan stopped digging. His breath was heavy, strained, but he turned his head slowly, clearly confused. My grip tightened around the knife handle. I could feel the blood pulsing in my veins, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Don't bother, Jess," I spat, taking a step closer. "Whatever excuse you're about to make isn't going to work. It's too late for that. It's not an excuse, Ryan, she said, and I noticed her voice had changed. There was something different in her tone, something urgent. It's the truth. You deserve to know the truth. What truth? I asked, my voice laced with sarcasm. That you've been screwing your co-worker behind my back 4 months. That truth? No, she said, her eyes flickering with something I hadn't seen in years. Guilt. Real, genuine guilt. This is about Dylan. I froze. My mind raced. I glanced at Dylan, who now stood completely still, staring up at me with wide, panicked eyes. Something clicked in my brain. She was going to throw him under the bus to save herself. That's what cheaters do, right? They try to weasel out of the situation by shifting blame. But then she dropped the bombshell. Dylan isn't just my affair partner, Jessica said, her voice barely above a whisper. He's been using me. Dylan's eyes flashed with anger. What the hell are you talking about, Jessica? She took a shaky breath, turning toward me, as if the confession was meant to cleanse her of the mess she'd made. He blackmailed me into sleeping with him. Blackmail? My brain tried to process the word. This wasn't what I was expecting. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. I had planned to expose them both, to punish them for betraying me, but blackmail? I looked at Dylan, waiting for him to deny it, but instead, he remained quiet, his jaw tightening. I could tell something was off. He wasn't panicking like a man who'd just been accused of something false. He was calculating, thinking, trying to figure out his next move. Jessica's lying, he finally muttered, his voice low and dangerous. She's trying to save her own ass. Don't listen to her, Ryan. She's telling the truth, isn't she? I pressed, my voice deadly calm. Dylan didn't respond, but the guilt was clear on his face. It was all falling apart for him, and he knew it. Jessica wasn't going to take the fall for him, not if she could salvage whatever was left of her life. Why didn't you tell me? I asked Jessica, my voice barely above a whisper. Why didn't you come to me? I was scared, she said, her eyes filled with tears. He threatened to ruin me, ruin my career. He said he had evidence, photos, emails. He said he'd make it look like I seduced him, that I was the one at fault. I was trapped. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My mind was spinning, trying to reconcile this new information with everything I thought I knew. Jessica had still cheated, that much was true, but if she had been manipulated, blackmailed, then maybe. No, I couldn't let her off the hook that easily. You still slept with him, I said coldly. You still betrayed me. Jessica's face crumpled as the weight of her actions bore down on her. I know, Ryan. I know I messed up, but I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to lose everything. Everything? I snapped. You mean your career? What about us, Jessica? What about our marriage? She sobbed, covering her face with her hands. Dylan stood silent, his hands balled into fists as he glared at her, furious that his dirty little secret had been exposed. But I wasn't done with them. Not by a long shot. The original plan I had for revenge was falling apart at the seams, but something darker began to brew in my mind. This new information, this twist, changed everything, but not in the way Jessica hoped. They both needed to pay. I wasn't going to let her blackmail story soften the blow. She still cheated. She still destroyed our marriage. And as for Dylan, he was worse than I thought. A manipulative, power-hungry predator who preyed on vulnerable women. I couldn't let either of them walk away from this. Ryan, Jessica pleaded, tears streaming down her face. Please, I'll do anything. Just don't hurt us. I let out a bitter laugh. Anything? That's rich coming from you. But don't worry, I won't kill you. That would be too easy. No, I have something else in mind. Something that'll make both of you wish you'd never crossed me. I pulled out my phone and started recording, making sure to capture their faces, the hole they were digging, the fear in their eyes. This was going to be more than just physical punishment. This was going to be psychological warfare. You're going to finish digging, I said, nodding toward the hole. Then you're both going to climb inside. Dylan's face went pale. You can't be serious. Oh, I'm dead serious, I said, my voice like ice. This isn't a grave. It's a trap. Jessica's sobs grew louder, but I ignored her. I kept my eyes locked on Dylan. He was the real target now. He was the one who had manipulated her, who had broken up my marriage for his own twisted games. Dylan hesitated for a moment, then resumed digging, his movements slower, weaker, as if the weight of the situation was finally catching up to him. Jessica knelt beside him, sobbing uncontrollably as she tried to help. They were both broken now, their confidence shattered. Just like they'd shattered me. I stepped back, letting them work. The night was quiet except for the sound of the shovel hitting the dirt. The moonlight cast long shadows across the ground, making everything feel surreal, like a nightmare. But this was no nightmare. This was real. This was happening. And when they finally climbed into the hole, trembling, pleading for mercy, I would have the final say. They were in the hole now, both of them trembling. I had imagined this moment for weeks, playing it over and over in my mind. But now, standing here with the dirt smeared on their hands, their faces pale and streaked with fear, it was surreal. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment they would understand the depth of their betrayal. Jessica looked up at me, her eyes wide and full of tears. Dylan was sitting next to her, covered in sweat and dirt, his face twisted in a mixture of panic and disbelief. The power dynamic had shifted. The man who had walked into my home, confident and smug, thinking he could steal my wife and destroy my life, was now reduced to nothing. And Jessica, my wife, the woman I had loved for years, had been reduced to a sniveling wreck. But none of this was enough. Not yet. Please, Ryan, Jessica's voice cracked. We can fix this. Please, just let us go. We won't say anything. I swear. I stared at her for a long moment, my grip tightening around the handle of the hunting knife still in my hand. The moonlight glinted off the blade, casting a long shadow over the edge of the hole. Jessica's breath hitched as she saw it, her voice dropping to a whisper. Please, fix this, I said, my voice cold and even. You think there's anything left to fix? Dylan shifted nervously beside her, his hands shaking as he tried to find his voice. Ryan, man, look, you're going too far. Okay? This isn't right. We messed up, I admit it, but this isn't how you handle it. I laughed, the sound harsh and bitter as it echoed through the quiet forest. Not how I handle it, I repeated. No, Dylan, this is exactly how I handle it. You see, when someone screws me over, when they take everything from me, I don't just sit back and let it happen. I take control. I crouched down at the edge of the hole, my eyes locked on his. The fear was written all over his face, and I savored it. This man, this smug, arrogant bastard, had destroyed my life, and now he was paying the price. You think you're still in control, don't you? I asked, my voice low and dangerous. You think there's some way out of this? Some way you can talk your way out of it, like you've done your whole life. Dylan swallowed hard, his eyes darting from me to the knife. He was sweating profusely, his breathing shallow. Look, man, we can work something out. I'll pay you, whatever you want. Just let us out of here. I smiled, a slow, cruel smile that didn't reach my eyes. You think I want your money? You really think that's what this is about? He didn't respond. The silence stretched between us, thick and heavy. Jessica was shaking beside him, her sobs growing quieter, as if she realized begging wouldn't work anymore. I leaned in closer, my face just inches from Dylan's, and spoke in a whisper. I don't want your money, Dylan. I want you to suffer. I want you both to feel what I've felt for the last year. The betrayal, the humiliation, the agony of watching everything you love crumble in front of you. I stood up and paced around the edge of the hole, my mind racing as I thought about what would come next. I had already destroyed their physical and emotional defenses. Now, it was time for the final phase. You're not going to die out here, I said, my voice calm, almost reassuring. Not today. That would be too easy. No, you're going to wish you were dead by the time I'm done. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. Jessica's eyes widened as she saw it, and she let out a gasp. What are you doing? I'm giving you one last chance to save yourselves, I said, my thumb hovering over the screen. But it's not going to be easy. I turned the phone around so they could see the screen. The video I had recorded earlier, the footage of them digging their own hole, played silently. The fear and desperation in their eyes were crystal clear. They knew what I was capable of now. You're going to record a confession, I said, holding the phone toward them. Both of you. You're going to tell me why you did it, how long it's been going on, and you're going to make it convincing. Because if you don't, well, let's just say things will get much worse. Dylan stared at the phone, his jaw clenched tight. Jessica shook her head, her voice trembling. No, Ryan, please, don't do this. We can talk about it. We can. I cut her off with a sharp, cold laugh. Talk about it? You think we're still at that point? No, Jessica, we're way past talking. I handed the phone to Dylan, who took it with shaking hands. His eyes flickered between me and Jessica, as if trying to gauge whether or not I was serious. But he knew I was. There was no doubt about it now. He cleared his throat, his voice unsteady. Okay, I'll do it. Jessica let out a sob, but she didn't argue. She knew there was no point. Dylan held the phone up, pointing it at his face. I could see the fear in his eyes, the panic barely contained behind his mask of false bravado. He took a deep breath and started speaking. "My name is Dylan Turner," he began, his voice shaking. I'm a professor at the university, and I've been having an affair with Jessica Holloway for about a year." Jessica sobbed louder, covering her face with her hands. Dylan hesitated, glancing at her, but I nodded for him to continue. He took another shaky breath. It wasn't just an affair," he said, his voice cracking. "I blackmailed her. I used her. I threatened her with photos and emails, made her sleep with me. I didn't care about her marriage, or her husband. I only cared about myself." He paused, his eyes filled with shame and fear. "I ruined Ryan's life. And now I'm going to pay for it." He lowered the phone, his hands shaking so badly that the camera trembled. I took the phone from him, saving the recording. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. Enough to destroy Dylan's reputation. Enough to show the world who he really was. Jessica was sobbing uncontrollably now, her whole body shaking with the weight of what had just happened. I turned to her, my expression cold and emotionless. "Your turn." She looked up at me, her tear-streaked face contorted with guilt and fear. "Ryan, please." "Now," I said, my voice icy. She took the phone with trembling hands and pointed it at herself. Her sobs made it difficult for her to speak at first, but she forced herself to start. "My name is Jessica Holloway," she whispered, her voice broken. "I've been having an affair with Dylan Turner for a year. I betrayed my husband. I destroyed my marriage. I made a terrible mistake, and I don't know how to fix it." She broke down into sobs, unable to continue. I didn't push her. I had what I needed. I took the phone from her and pocketed it. The confess irons were done, but the night was far from over. They had to learn that this wasn't just about their infidelity. This was about justice. My justice. I walked over to the backpack I had brought with me, pulling out a thick length of rope and a pair of handcuffs. Dylan's eyes widened as he saw them, and he started to scramble to his feet. No, what are you doing?" he stammered, his voice shaking with fear. "You're going to stay down there," I said calmly, walking over to the edge of the hole. "I'm not done with you yet." Dylan tried to climb out, but I grabbed his arm and twisted it behind his back, forcing him down. He let out a pained grunt as I cuffed his hands behind him, securing them tightly. Jessica watched in horror, too afraid to move. I tied the rope around a nearby tree, securing it firmly, then tossed the other end into the hole. They could try to escape if they wanted, but they wouldn't get far. The rope was long enough to give them hope but short enough to keep them tethered to the spot. "Enjoy the rest of your night," I said, my voice dripping with cold satisfaction. "You've got plenty of time to think about what you've done." I turned and started walking back toward the cabin, leaving them behind in the hole. Their cries for help echoed through the trees, but I didn't look back. I had more to plan. Hours passed. The sun began to rise, casting a faint light through the trees. I had spent the night in the cabin, going over every detail of what had happened. But something was still gnawing at me, something unresolved. As I walked back to the hole, I could hear them before I saw them. Jessica was crying softly, her voice hoarse from hours of sobbing. Dylan was muttering to himself, a mixture of anger and despair in his tone. When I reached the edge of the hole, they both looked up at me, their faces pale and streaked with dirt. They hadn't slept, their eyes wide with fear and exhaustion. "Time's up," I said, my voice firm. "It's time to end this." It was morning now. The first rays of sunlight filtered through the dense canopy, casting long, jagged shadows across the forest floor. I stood at the edge of the hole where Jessica and Dylan sat, their bodies slumped in exhaustion, their faces smeared with dirt and sweat. It was time to end this. But how? How do you bring justice to people who shattered your life, turned everything you believed in upside down? They had been in that hole for nearly 12 hours, cold, alone, and bound. But it wasn't enough. Their punishment wasn't just about suffering in a physical sense, it had to be psychological. They had to feel the full weight of what they had done, every second stretching into an eternity of regret. I could see the panic still in their eyes. They were terrified of what was coming, terrified of me, and they should be. I had already taken them farther than they ever thought possible. Now it was time to break them. I stood silently, letting the moment drag on, letting the tension rise. Dylan glanced up at me, his lips cracked and dry. "Ryan, come on, man," he rasped. His voice was weaker now, almost pleading. "You've made your point. We're sorry. We'll do whatever you want, just let us out." Jessica, who had been sobbing uncontrollably, barely had the strength to speak. Her lips moved, but no words came out. Her once beautiful face was now a mess of dirt, tears, and desperation. The woman I had once loved was unrecognizable, a hollow shell of herself. But I wasn't here to feel pity. Not anymore. I knelt down, close enough that they could feel my breath, but far enough that they couldn't touch me. The knife was still in my hand, though I hadn't used it yet. They needed to know it was there, hovering between us as an unspoken threat. "Do you remember when this all started?" I asked softly, my voice almost gentle. "Do you remember the first lie you told? The first time you snuck off to meet him?" Jessica's head snapped up at the sound of my voice, her eyes red and swollen from crying. "Ryan, please. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for any of this to happen." I raised an eyebrow, not saying anything. Her apologies were hollow, meaningless. Every word she spoke was just another reminder of her betrayal. "Dylan?" I shifted my attention to him. "What about you? Do you remember? Or was she just another notch on your belt? Another conquest?" He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. "I was wrong. I know that. I messed up. But you have to understand, man. I didn't mean for it to get this far. I never wanted to destroy your marriage." I smirked, shaking my head. "You never wanted to destroy my marriage?" I let out a short, humorless laugh. "Is that what you tell yourself to feel better? That it was just some harmless fun?" Dylan opened his mouth to respond, but I cut him off, my voice suddenly sharp and cold. "I don't care what you wanted, Dylan. I care about what you did, and what you did was destroy my life." The silence that followed was suffocating. I could see the fear in both of them now, not just for their lives, but for the realization that there was no escape, no way to talk their way out of this. I stood up and began pacing along the edge of the hole, dragging the tip of the knife through the dirt. Their eyes followed the blade, mesmerized by its movement, as if it represented their only hope of survival. "Here's the thing," I said after a long pause, my tone almost conversational. "I've been thinking a lot about what comes next. You've both confessed, so I could go to the police with that video. I could ruin your lives, destroy your careers, make sure you never show your faces in this town again." Dylan flinched at the thought, and I saw Jessica's lips tremble, her silent pleading intensifying. "But where's the justice in that?" I asked, mostly to myself. "You'll get some slap on the wrist, maybe serve a few years in prison, maybe not, and then you'll move on. You'll rebuild your lives while I'm left with nothing." Jessica shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "No, Ryan. It's not like that. I'll do anything to make this right. Anything. Please, just give me a chance." I stopped pacing and stared down at her. "Make it right?" I repeated, my voice dripping with venom. "You can't make this right, Jessica. There's nothing you can do that will ever fix this." I crouched down again, bringing myself to their level. I was done with talking. Now it was time to make them feel everything they had made me feel. "You've already lost your freedom for tonight," I began slowly, making sure each word sank in. "But there's something else I can take from you." Dylan's face paled, and Jessica's eyes widened in confusion. What do you mean?" she stammered. "I mean your reputation. Your future. The life you thought you could have after this is over." I paused, watching the realization dawn on them. "You see, I recorded everything last night. Every pathetic moment of you digging that hole, of you pleading for your lives, of you confessing to the whole world what you did." Jessica's sobs grew louder, and Dylan's expression twisted into one of pure horror. No, Ryan. You can't do that. Please." I smiled grimly. "Oh, I can, and I will." For the first time since this all started, I saw true panic in their eyes. It was no longer just about their lives, it was about their entire existence. Everything they had built, everything they thought they were, was hanging by a thread, and I was holding the scissors. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, flipping through the files until I found the video. I held it up for them to see, pressing play. The screen came to life with the image of them, filthy and broken, digging their own graves. "I'm going to post this," I said calmly, "everywhere. Social media, news outlets, your jobs. Everyone will know what you did. Your colleagues, your friends, your families. By the time I'm done, you'll be the most hated people in this city." Jessica let out a scream, her hands flying to her face as if to shield herself from the truth. Dylan's shoulders slumped in defeat, the last remnants of his bravado crumbling. "Ryan, please," Jessica begged, her voice hoarse from crying. "I'll do anything. Just don't ruin my life." I stared at her for a long moment, feeling nothing but disgust. This was the woman I had loved, the woman I had promised to spend my life with, and now, she was nothing more than a stranger, a betrayer. "I already ruined your life the moment you crawled into that hole," I said coldly. "I'm just finishing the job." I turned away from them, walking back to where the rope was tied to the tree. Slowly, methodically, I began to pull on the rope, dragging them closer to the surface. They gasped in surprise, thinking this was their chance to escape. But I had no intention of letting them go. When they were near the top, I stopped and leaned over the edge, my face just inches from theirs. "You're going to climb out," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "And you're going to run, as fast and as far as you can." Dylan blinked in confusion, his voice trembling. What? What are you talking about?" "You heard me," I said, standing up and backing away. "Run. Go on. See how far you get." For a moment, they just stared at me, unsure if I was serious. But then, slowly, they began to scramble out of the hole, their limbs weak and shaky from hours of being confined. They looked like animals, desperate, pathetic, and completely at my mercy. As soon as they were out, they bolted. Dylan grabbed Jessica's hand, pulling her along with him as they stumbled through the woods, their breaths coming in short, panicked gasps. They didn't look back. They just ran, thinking they had a chance. I watched them go, my heart pounding in my chest. The adrenaline was surging through my veins, but I wasn't done. Not yet. I waited until they were almost out of sight, and then I reached into my backpack, pulling out the final piece of my plan, a small drone, equipped with a camera and a speaker. I had spent weeks learning how to fly it, preparing for this exact moment. With a flick of the remote, the drone buzzed to life, rising into the air and speeding off in the direction they had gone. I could see them on the screen, running blindly through the forest, unaware that I was still watching them. I pressed the button on the speaker, my voice booming through the trees. "You can't hide from me." Jessica and Dylan stopped dead in their tracks. Their bodies were trembling, their eyes darting wildly as the mechanical hum of the drone circled above them. It was as if they had stepped into some twisted nightmare, but the worst part was, they knew it was real. They were trapped. I was playing with them, like a predator stalking its prey. "You thought I'd let you get away?" My voice crackled through the drone speaker, echoing ominously through the dense forest. "No one escapes this, not after what you've done." Dylan grabbed Jessica's arm, pulling her toward a cluster of trees. They dug behind the thick trunks, trying to shield themselves from the drone's camera, but I had the upper hand. The drone swooped around effortless, its camera following them as they clung to each other in their pathetic attempt to hide. I watched them on my screen, feeling an icy satisfaction wash over me. The tables had completely turned. They had no control, no power left. All they could do was run and cower, knowing that I was always watching. And there was no escape. "Dylan," Jessica screamed, her voice shrill with panic. "What are we going to do? He's going to kill us." Dylan was breathing hard, his eyes wide with fear. We have to find a way out of the forest. If we can make it back to the road, maybe we can flag someone down." "Back to the road?" I said through the drone speaker, my voice calm, almost amused. "Do you really think you'll make it? You don't even know where you are." They flinched at the sound of my voice, realizing that I could hear everything. Their thoughts, their plans. They had no secrets left. I kept the drone hovering above them, letting them stew in their fear as they clung to each other, helpless and confused. They tried to move deeper into the woods, but every few steps, the drone would buzz closer, its mechanical whine a constant reminder that they weren't alone. They were getting desperate. Dylan was trying to calm Jessica down, but I could see the fear etched across his face. He wasn't some tough guy anymore, not like the man who had smugly taken my wife from me. Now, he was just a scared little boy, lost in the woods, with nowhere to turn. I let them run for a little longer, just enough to exhaust them further. Their frantic movements slowed, and their energy started to wane. Every time they thought they were gaining distance, the drone appeared again, reminding them they were never more than a step ahead. They stumbled into a clearing, panting and covered in sweat. The air was thick and humid, the rising sun turning the forest into a sweltering prison. They looked around, disoriented, realizing too late that they had gone in circles. I had been herding them the entire time, leading them right back to the starting point. "You're not very good at this, are you?" I said through the drone. "You've been running in circles." Dylan's frustration boiled over. He clenched his fists, screaming at the sky. "Come out and face us like a man. Stop hiding behind your gadgets." I laughed coldly into the speaker. "Face you? Why would I do that? You're already broken. I don't need to be there to watch you fall apart." Jessica collapsed onto the ground, sobbing uncontrollably. Her whole body shook as she wailed, burying her face in her hands. Dylan tried to pull her to her feet, but his own strength was failing. I had let them suffer enough. I turned off the drone's camera feed and began walking toward the clearing. I had marked this spot on my map earlier, knowing it would be the perfect place to end things. The trees thinned out here, and the thick underbrush gave way to a natural opening, a place where there would be no escape. When I stepped into the clearing, they didn't see me at first. They were too focused on their own misery. Dylan had finally managed to get Jessica to her feet, but they both looked like they were about to collapse. Their clothes were torn, their faces streaked with dirt and sweat. I took a slow, deliberate step forward, letting the sound of my boots crunching through the leaves announce my arrival. Jessica gasped when she saw me, her eyes widening in horror. "Ryan," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Please." Dylan spun around, his body tense, ready to fight. But he knew, just as well as I did, that he didn't have the strength left. I looked at them both, feeling a strange sense of calm settle over me. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even sad. I was just finished. "Ryan," Dylan said, trying to sound tough, "it doesn't have to be this way. We can work something out." I raised my eyebrows, genuinely curious. "Oh, and what would that be, Dylan? What exactly do you think you have to offer me?" He swallowed hard, glancing at Jessica. We'll leave. For good. You'll never see us again. Just let us go, man. Please." Jessica's voice broke through the silence, trembling and weak. "I'm sorry, Ryan. I never meant to hurt you like this. I was stupid. I didn't know what I was doing." I shook my head, cutting her off. "You knew exactly what you were doing. Both of you. You made your choices. Now, you have to live with them." They both stared at me, fear etched into every line of their faces. They knew, deep down, that this was the end. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small handgun I had been carrying with me the whole time. It wasn't about killing them, at least, not at first. It was about making them see that I held all the power. Jessica screamed, backing away in terror. Dylan stepped in front of her, his hands raised in a pathetic attempt to shield her. "Ryan, wait!" Dylan shouted, his voice cracking with fear. "You don't have to do this. You don't want to go to jail for this, man. Think about it." I tilted my head, considering his words. "Jail?" I asked, almost amused. "You think I'm worried about going to jail after what you two did to me?" I pointed the gun at Dylan, watching as his face twisted in terror. "I've already lost everything that mattered," I said, my voice low and deadly. "Now, it's your turn." The gunshot echoed through the forest, a sharp crack that cut through the morning air like a knife. Dylan dropped to the ground, clutching his leg where the bullet had grazed him. He howled in pain, writhing on the ground as blood soaked through his jeans. Jessica screamed, falling to her knees beside him. "Ryan, no, stop." But I wasn't listening to her anymore. I walked slowly toward Dylan, watching as he struggled to crawl away from me, his face twisted in agony. The smell of blood and dirt filled the air, mixing with the sweat and fear that clung to him like a second skin. I stood over him, watching as he tried to drag himself through the dirt. He was nothing now. Broken, defeated, exactly what he deserved to be. "Please, Ryan," he whimpered. "I'll do anything. Please, don't kill me." I crouched down beside him, pressing the barrel of the gun against the back of his head. He froze, his whole body shaking as he realized how close he was to the end. "You thought you could take everything from me and just walk away?" I whispered in his ear. "You thought there wouldn't be consequences?" He didn't respond, too terrified to speak. I let the moment drag on, the weight of the gun pressing harder against his skull. Then, slowly, I stood up and lowered the gun, leaving him there, trembling and broken on the ground. Jessica was sobbing uncontrollably, her face buried in her hands. She hadn't moved since I shot Dylan. I stared at her for a long moment, feeling the weight of everything we had once been together. But that was over now. She wasn't my wife anymore. She was just another casualty in the wreckage of our lives. Without another word, I turned and walked away, leaving them both there in the clearing, lost and alone. I don't know how long I walked through the forest. Time had stopped mattering. The sun climbed higher in the sky, and the shadows grew shorter as I made my way back to the spot where I had left my truck. I felt empty, not the way I thought I would feel. I had imagined that revenge would give me some kind of closure, some kind of satisfaction. But it hadn't. I had destroyed them, just like they had destroyed me. And in the process, I had lost the last pieces of myself. When I reached my truck, I stood there for a moment, staring at the trees around me. The forest was quiet now, the chaos of the morning fading into stillness. I climbed into the driver's seat, my hand shaking as I started the engine. As I drove away, I realized that I didn't know what came next. I had spent so long planning this, so long building toward this moment, that I had never considered what would happen after. All I knew was that I couldn't go back. I was a different person now,